Welcome to the General Government Committee meeting of February 5th, 2025. It's now 6 p.m., a little bit after. And may we have a roll call, please?
Good evening, everyone.
Good evening.
Councilmember Dennehy,
Here.
Maloney,
Here.
Schmisher. Here. Stein,
Here.
Tracy,
Here.
Worthington,
Here.
Mayor Pro Tem Hamrick,
Here.
Mayor Troutman.
Here.
Thank you for that. Tonight, we're going to be talking about water rates and customer classes for our water department. I do have a request to speak at the council. These are generally more informal type meetings, and so I have a request from Jonathan Sims. You can speak now, or you can wait until the subject comes up and raise your hand, and we'll recognize you, and then you can have your say. Does that sound all right? Thank you. Sure. So with that, I guess, Mr. Administrator, we're ready for the meeting.
Okay, great. The city's been working on a update to our water master plan, and as part of that water master plan, we did a water rate study, and tonight's discussion is looking at the results of that study and how that affects water classes and the distribution of how those fees are distributed. And I will pass it over to Travis Payne, our water superintendent.
Yep, very well said. We have Todd Cristiano here with Raftellus. He's going to do a presentation, and then we can take questions, throughout. But certainly we'll have plenty of time after the presentation for any discussion we would like to do. I would like to point out that at the Water Committee meeting, when this topic was discussed, it was kind of a lot of discussion was distilled down to them recommending a full cost allocation with the possibility of a phased approach to that full cost allocation. So with that, I'll just turn it over to Todd.
Thank you, Travis.
Here, there we go. Mayor Troutman, members of council, good evening. My name is Todd Cristiano with Raftellus. My presentation tonight is a summary of the work that I've been working with on Travis and others on this water rate study since about June of last year. This presentation's got a bit of detail in it, so bear with me as we go through it, and obviously we can take questions as we go along. There are some detailed topics in here I'll go through, and hopefully if you have any questions, I'll hopefully can clarify any things that may seem unclear. The agenda is we're going to talk about what the study goals and objectives are. We kind of hit on that just a second ago. Talk a little bit about what is this rate study process? What do you go through to set rates for water? We'll talk about this cost of service discussion and what that means in terms of rates. And we'll show you our proposed rates. We have our one set of rates, our cost of service rates, and then we have an alternative called adjusted cost of service rates. I'll get into that in more detail in just a moment. And obviously we have the bill comparison and utility survey, which is always an important tool for councils when evaluating rates for their community. There's three components to a rate study, and the first one is a financial plan. That basically tells us how much revenue do we need to meet our annual expenditures. The cost of service is everyone paying their fair share? If you think about when you go to dinner with a group of friends, you can pay one of two ways. You can split it equally down the middle for everybody. Everyone pays the same rate, despite that I ordered the filet and somebody just got a salad. Or everyone can pay their fair share of cost for what they ordered. That's cost of service. And we go through a lot of calculations to get there, and I'll walk through that when we get to those slides. Finally, rate design. How can we ensure that we're recovering those costs fairly? The water rates you currently have two components, a monthly service charge that varies by meter size, and a volume rate for all water consumed. And we'll go over those structures in the rate design section. So the financial plan recap, you may recall that I spoke with the rate subcommittee back in November and also with council in beginning of December, walking through our financial plan, 10-year financial plan. And we had decided, we had proposed 10 years of equal annual adjustments of 7%. We were going to have some SRF funding for some main replacements, and total of $51.5 million of capital improvements identified in the master plan. We are going to fund with those 7%. We also need to maintain our debt service coverage requirements by the bond covenants, and obviously maintain the city policy of reserves for water. And finally, you can't see it on there, but we had evaluated your tap fees or your plant investment fee, those one-time connections to new development coming in. And we did an evaluation of those fees and found that the fees you're charging today are sufficient for helping to recover the cost to serve new capacity to customers. So let's talk about the cost service. This is kind of the detailed component of the study here. What is a cost of service analysis? Well, it determines the amount of revenue we need to recover from each customer class. And we do that by looking at the customer class demand characteristics, how those customer classes use water. So if you think about an irrigation class that uses a lot of water in the summertime and very little in wintertime, their demand patterns are different than, say, a commercial customer who might be more uniform. You think about a Starbucks or something, they might be more uniform through the year. Those different types of demands command different costs to provide them service. You also have the different types of customers within a class. And types of customers, I mean sizes of meters. The larger the meter size, the higher capacity requirement they require. So a 4-inch meter obviously might be moving more water than a 3/4 inch, so they require more capacity on the system. So that's a cost as well. So it's those components that really drive the differences between the cost between the various customer classes. It's about how they place demands on the system and the cost it takes to serve them. And that's basically the rest of these slides here. And these different types of demands are called average day demands and peak day demands or peak hour demands. You may have heard that in some other discussions about water discussions here about your system. And that last slide, that last bullet there, the cost will usually vary by customer class just for that reason, the fact that the demand patterns for different customer classes vary. So the steps in this, we determine what's called a revenue requirement. So we look at your budget year. In this term, in this example, we're looking to set the rates or the cost of service rates for 2025. So we looked at the 2025 budget, the capital expenditures for this year, and that's called our revenue requirement. What is the revenue required from rates to meet all the, what's the revenue we need to require from rates to meet those costs? We assign all these different costs based on how the facilities are used. So think of it this way. We have all these costs in the budget. They're labeled materials and supplies. You have some distribution cost in your budget. You have treatment costs in your budget. You have chemicals, utilities, and all those sorts of things. We have to assign those to different facilities that drive that expense. So if you think about a water treatment plant, chemicals are most aligned with a water treatment plant. So we go through putting these costs in buckets, and we know that each one of these facilities are designed or operate to do a certain thing. Water treatment plants are designed to meet maximum day demands. Storage is designed to meet peak hour demands. Pump stations maybe max day or maximum hour demands as well. And if we can state our costs in those components, maximum day, average day, and peak hour, and customer components, we can relate that to the various customer classes because customers have average day demands, they have maximum day demands, they have maximum hour demands, and they also have customers within them. So that's the basic process we go through. And so it's a pretty detailed process, and we work in detail with Travis and others to get those allocations in the appropriate place based on your O&M budget for 25 and the capital improvements you anticipate spending in 2025. So some of the areas of focus for this study we discussed at the very beginning, and one was looking at a zone charge or pumping zone rates, which hadn't been modified in a number of years. Looking at the equitable allocation of golf course and city park costs. Perfect example of how a cost service analysis works. We looked at how they're charged today, but looked at their demand characteristics for both classes to find out, well, how should they be charged? And that puts them on par with how we're determining the cost of service for every other class and the rates for that matter. Our fire protection rates. There was a discussion earlier today about fire protection, and the city does not currently have private fire protection, but we designed some rates for your consideration. And I don't remember what the last bullet is, but we're going to come up with it, I can tell you for sure. There we go. Combining the group user class and the municipal class. That was one other item we wanted to look at. And you'll see tonight those separated out, we can talk about what would happen if we combine those. And should cost of service rates be adopted for all classes? This was another question we had. That meaning the monthly volume charges and service charges. And that's what we're going to call the pure cost of service. So we do our analysis, and the numbers fall where they may based on our analysis. If we do that, the commercial and multifamily unit rates will decrease slightly based on our cost service analysis. So what we're saying is that from the last study that was done in 2017, a number of years ago, to today, there's been some changes in costing and allocations and demand patterns such that there's less of a cost requirement for commercial and multifamily. And the same thing with the monthly meter service charges. The 1 inch and greater will be going down a bit from the last study. We got some better information in terms of meter cost information and that sort of thing, and that's probably the primary reason why those went down from 2017. I'm not as familiar with what happened in 2017, but looking at some of the numbers there, I think we got some more updated information from what was in the 2017 study. So should cost service rates be adopted for all classes? Option 1 we looked at was the pure cost of service. We do the analysis, the rates and cost of service fall where it may. Option 2 we worked through because we know there are some decreases in rates, and in our experience, in my experience, there are some communities that, while they're doing the cost service analysis, they want to keep rates. They don't want to reduce rates only to have to raise them again in the future. It's confusing to customers, and they can't plan for that very well. So we did one alternative saying, look, we're going to make some adjustments to our cost of service to where nobody's rate is lower. It's the greater of the cost of service value we calculated or the existing rate. And that way we won't have that commercial multifamily going down, like I just mentioned, on the pure cost of service. So it's just an alternative we looked at to kind of benchmark about how that might change customer classes' rates. Other questions: should private fire line protection rates be adopted as a new fee? They have approximately 85 accounts, and it sounds like that might be growing in the future. The total cost recovery is about $38,000. Now, I want to be clear that this $38,000 is not in addition to what we need to recover. It's part of the cost of service. So essentially, we're taking $38,000 from other classes to assign it to the private fire protection customers. So it gets to that equity component of what the goal of cost of service is this proportionality of costs. And should cost of service pumping charges be adopted? They're last changed over 5 years ago, and so we had some pretty drastic changes in the fees, but we took a pretty deep dive on looking at those costs, everything from solar credits to their individual electric bills. We took a really deep dive on that. I'm not sure how deep they went in the previous study. But basically what this does is it realigns the costs associated with meeting those demands and providing pumping service to those customers that need it. Just like the regular cost of service analysis, this is no different. It was part of the bigger process here. Now, I'll tell you that our cost recovery is increasing there. It's going from $154,000 to approximately $417,000. So it is an increase over the previous pumping charges. But again, they haven't been adjusted in over 5 years. And should the group user class be combined with the municipal class? That was another discussion we had at the very beginning, and we're going to show you some numbers on that for discussion tonight. The group user class has very few customers, and it has a large diversity of demand. And what I'm saying there is that because you have so few customers and there's such a variety of demands there that one customer can really influence the class costing and whatnot. So that's one thing we found about the group user class. And it's really true of any small class. You're going to have, when you don't have many customers, you get more heterogeneity, right, in them than a larger class. A calculated cost of service show a slight decrease in their rates. And the current rate is similar to the proposed municipal rate of $4.68. That's current rate. Combined, this rate would reduce slightly, I believe. So.
Just a point of clarification, since we have so many folks in the audience, and I think group user isn't quite as self-evident as some of the other titles. Correct me if I'm wrong, but group users are other municipalities that we sell water to, like Brookside. Is that accurate?
Yeah, so Brookside and Orchard Park not a municipality,
Sure.
but we'd call them a water district.
Okay.
So, yeah, for lack of a better term, we'd say municipality.
And
but other
just those
government-
two?
Yes, just those two.
Awesome,
Yep.
thank you.
So that probably answers the question, too, of why there's such a great diversity in demand with those two, so. Okay, so let's look at the cost of service results. You'll see the number down at the bottom first, $9.317 million. That's the amount we need to recover from rates. Our total costs for the year were higher, but we also have some miscellaneous revenues to help offset those costs. And that offset reduces our revenue requirement to this $9.3 million. In the pure cost service example and the other example, we're still recovering the $9.3 million with one exception, and I'll go into that in a minute. So you can see the 2025 cost of service for all the various customer classes. You can see municipals on there, group user rate, the pumping classes, that $417,000 I just mentioned is there. There's the private fire protection at about $38,000. So it all comes down to $9.3 million. Let's compare that to what you're getting under your 2025 rates that were just adopted. Those rates times the projected uses for 2025, and let's see how that varies. We're still getting $9.31 million, but we're comparing it against the revenue you're getting from your 2025 rates, the current rate structure, and the volume projections or demand projections for each class. So there's some slight differences here. 1.3% difference in residential, so not much changes there. We see a decrease in commercial and multi-unit, and one of the reasons for the multi-unit decrease is that back in 2017, there was also a proposed or recommendation to reduce the multifamily class, and I believe there was 1 year of decrease, and then it leveled out and started increasing. So we have the same thing that happened here again. I may not have that exactly right, but there was in the 2017 cost of service showed that multifamily, commercial multi-unit did showing a decrease in their costs. Municipal, obviously an increase there. Group user rate, a slight decrease, and pumping, obviously an increase there, so on and so forth. So what this is saying is that under the 2025 rates, given the volume projections and account projections, with the current rate structure you have, we're going to recover $9.3 million, but we're going to recover from each customer class as the way it's listed there, the $4.7 million for residential, the $2.562 for commercial, so on and so forth. With our cost of service analysis, using the same demand projections and account projections, after we've gone through all that cost allocation I mentioned, the costs are arriving at those levels. So residential is $4.8 million, which is, again, 1.3% greater than the revenue you're getting under the 2025 rates. So that's our pure cost of service, no adjustments for no rate lower, but this is our first cut at the cost of service, and we're going to show you the rates that are designed, the rates that are based off this cost of service analysis as well. Okay, let's look at the adjusted cost of service analysis. These numbers are a little bit different here. You can see that residential is actually $4.762 million instead of the 4.8, I believe, on the previous one, 4.8. And what we had done is we knew that in our cost of service, you saw that some classes were going up and some classes were going down. And what we wanted to do is this alternative is saying, well, these classes that are going down, commercial multi-unit, for example, is going down about $400,000. You say, well, let's keep that cost the same. And that $400,000 we would recover then, let's use that to reduce other customer classes' cost of service. And we did that here. So you can see this with the residential, that it goes, in our cost of service, it goes from $4.8 million down to 4.7, a slight decrease. So those classes were holding steady. We're taking that revenue we would have otherwise reduced, and we're helping reduce other customer classes. You'll notice at the bottom here that it says 9.355 instead of 9.317. That is due to the fact that we had about $38,000 of revenue left over to distribute that we couldn't really reduce anybody else's rate any further. So we're essentially over-recovering by about $38,000 in this example. So it's a confusing concept, but at the end of the day, the goal of this was that no customer class's rate would be lower. That's the ultimate goal we try to achieve with this example here. So you can see that we were able to really offset a lot of the increases. But if you recall, the commercial and multi-unit were going down quite a bit, like $700,000 worth in total. So we were able to redistribute that to the other customer classes, and it basically zeroed them all out. I was surprised as well when we did that. So it's the adjusted cost of service. But really it comes down to, these numbers are great, but it really comes down to what do the rates look like? And we're going to jump into that here. Let's talk about rate design. We did not make any structural changes to the rate design. So the single family still has the tiered structure. We still have the service charge by meter size and uniform rates for all other classes. And our service charge, or the monthly base charge, meter charge, whatever you want to call it, recovers three types of things. It recovers the billing component, the cost of sending a bill, the cost of the IT software, the cost of the billing technicians and whatnot to send that bill, and it's usually a couple of dollars per bill. It also recovers meter maintenance and meter reading, because that's a customer-related component. Every customer has that. You need to have that regardless of whether you have water use or not. And we know that obviously the cost of meters, like everything else, have gone up to an extent. And to repair and replacement, you have to have field service crew go out there and pull the meter. You have to do the bench test. You have to replace it and put it back in. There's labor associated with that, so we're recovering that cost as well. And finally, a component of capital cost equal to depreciation. So right now, the city is, the water utility gets about 30% of the rate revenue from your fixed charges or your monthly base charges. And we want to kind of maintain that, because the 30% recovery is, I wouldn't say standard, but it's common. Between 25 and 35% is what we're seeing in Colorado. It's a huge turn from the early 2000s during the drought, when everybody wanted to lower their service charge so people had more control over the bill during the 2002 drought and whatnot, but it's shot back up in the range there. So the city's in a good place there. And the way we're doing that, what we're saying here is that we want to try to recover a component of your depreciation-related costs. Now, it's not actual depreciation. We're just using that as a proxy of saying, look, we know that your assets depreciate each year due to obsolescence or wear and tear, and we want to kind of benchmark that and try to recover that depreciation or an amount equal to that each year. We're doing that in the service charge. That doesn't recover all of your capital costs. A lot of the capital costs are still going to be recovered from your volume rate, but we wanted to ensure that there was some component of your fee structure that is fixed that does bring in some capital-related costs that are fixed that you're going to receive every month. And it supports about a 30% recovery of your fixed charge revenue as a percentage of total rate revenue. Again, that's kind of like in the sweet spot of what we're seeing with other utilities. The volume-related costs include the costs associated with collecting, treating, and distributing water to customers, all the things that customer costs don't. So we have to think about that this is not a fixed variable analysis when we think of cost of service. With cost of service, we think about the cost to provide water service and the customer costs associated with that. A fixed variable analysis basically says, well, 80% of our costs are fixed, so let's put 80% of our costs in the fixed charge and then charge 50 cents per 1,000 gallons in the volume charge. That's the fixed variable analysis. Cost of service analysis is a little bit differently. So this is how we came up with the costs here for the rate design. Now, the rate design does have a fixed cost and a variable cost, but the way we came up with the cost was through the cost service and different than a fixed variable analysis. Okay, so here are the different, here's your existing rates for the service charge and the cost of service and the adjusted cost of service. You can see that the 1 inch and larger are going down on the cost of service. Again, just we had better data this time around, I think, and hence the reason they went down a bit. And at 2025 adjusted, we're taking the greater of the existing or the adjusted cost of service numbers we came up with. So you can see that the 1 inch for cost of service is currently $28.48. On the cost of service, it's going down to $24.58. But on the adjusted, we're saying, well, no 1 inch bill is going to be lower for the service charge, so we're going to maintain the $28.48. so on and so forth with the rest of those there, and that kind of filters to the rate design, the volumetric component as well. Here's the volumetric rates, the three-tiered rate structure for residential stands. We've not made any changes to the thresholds here. The changes in water demand for residential have been fairly minimal, hence the reason the percentage change in the cost service was fairly nominal compared to other classes. There just wasn't a lot of change in the demand patterns from the previous study. And you can see that we are, the 2025 rates are $2.17, so on and so forth. The cost of service, it goes up to $2.33. But with the adjusted cost of service, we took the greater of the existing or the adjusted cost of service rates. So in this example, the $2.27 was the adjusted cost of service volume rate. It's greater than the existing, so we selected that. So it's a bit confusing, but that's how that alternative worked for all the rate classes, including residential and commercial and irrigation and whatnot. More importantly here is the pumping charges. We developed obviously the cost of service rates. We saw that jump from the existing to the proposed rates. The cost of service rates, you can see the lower Dawson going from 82 cents to $1.30. And I think the biggest jump was the upper Dawson from $1.79 to $3.17. Again, those were last updated a number of years ago. We're not sure the cost basis for those, but we did a very in-depth analysis on the pumping zones this time and looked at a number of different ways and came up with about the same answers. The adjusted cost of service, you can see, are pretty much the same as the existing, because the adjusted cost of service for the pumping was much lower than the cost of service. So finally, here's a map of the different pump zones. Travis, I didn't know if you wanted to make any comment on this right here.
No, I just thought it would be appropriate to see what we're actually talking about. When we're talking about pump zones, you have, the lower mid Dawson, lower mid and upper Dawson, and you have 4 Mile there to the east, and we can't see North 9th, but everybody knows where 9th Street is, so it's on the upper side of 9th Street. So that's their own little pump zone up there. You can see outlined in yellow. So those are the customers we'd be talking about when we're talking about the pump zone surcharges.
Okay. And finally, the private fire protection fees, 4-inch and 6-inch are very common. The 4-inch would be $12.82, and the 6-inch would be $37.23 per month. That's in addition to their monthly service charge and any sort of volumetric rate they would have on their usage. Private fire protection rates aren't assessed a volumetric charge or anything. It's just a fixed fee every month.
Yeah, so that would be the only monthly charge they get. And for clarity, tap fees for fire lines would still be no cost.
So here's a comparison of where we landed with all the different cost, service, and rate alternatives here. We have 3 levels of consumption here, and one represents kind of a winter consumption, a lower average consumption, then maybe a higher average or summerish type consumption. And you can see with residential here, there are some slight differences between the existing and cost of service. The adjusted cost of service at 3,000 gallons is slightly lower, and it's lower on all the other usage levels as well, and it's just because of the way those rates shaked out based on our analysis. So not too many jumps between the different volumetric. They seem to increase at the same level. And the utility survey, we did a lot of searching to find utilities that were of similar size, complexity, and water treatment. And you can see here the blue bars here represent the existing, the cost of service based rates and the adjusted cost of service rates. And so that does move Canyon City up to 5576. Now, a lot of these have been updated with 2025 rates. I think there's 1 or 2 that weren't adjusting their rates for 2025. So I'd say this is a pretty current assessment compared to the other utilities. But again, each utility is so different. We don't know what they're doing at their utility, whether they're meeting all the regs and all that stuff. So just all sorts of different things that could cause the rates to be different than the cities here. That concludes my presentation. A lot of information there. Be happy to answer any questions.
Yes, my question is, the fire hydrant that's on Tunnel Drive, that's out in the open, and I've seen in the past that area fire stations use that, like to fill up their trucks. So do we charge them for that, or is that a countywide thing, or how does that work?
I've just been told about that, and we don't charge them, and that's something that I need to handle. I think that's always been a longstanding thing that they do that I wasn't aware of, so.
Okay, and then my second question is there going to be a special rate for the water we sell? I mean, like, aside from what's on in our district, like people that buy water in bulk from us, are we going to adjust that also?
We're not going to, well, that rate gets adjusted with normal rate adjustments every year, but they weren't considered as a customer class in this rate study.
Okay, all right, thank you.
I have a couple of questions as well. With regard to, could we go back to the comparison of existing and proposed volume rates?
18, I think.
Yeah, sorry, slide 18. So I just want to make sure I understand. The reason why different volume costs different isn't because of the collection, treatment, or distribution. It's more about the storage and the pumping depending on where it is. I guess I'm wondering, like, why would it cost more for 3,000 gallons to a residence than it would to a commercial property?
That's a great question. It gets back to the demand requirements of that customer class. So for a customer class that places different demands on the system, there's a different cost associated with providing that service. So the whole premise of cost of service is based, is looking at these customer class demand patterns, and based on how they use the system, how they're renting the system for that particular point in the day, time of the year or month. There's a different cost, there's a cost associated with that, but how another customer class places a certain demand on the system, there's a different cost associated with that. So those are the primary drivers for the reason the costs are different between the customer classes.
Okay, so the cost, like, per 1,000 gallons of water isn't necessarily different, but because we might have to be giving them more at a peak demand, we are having to process more, and therefore the
Yeah.
costs are higher.
Yeah, so
Is
on
that?
that's a fair statement. So if you had, as a very basic example, hypothetical example, that if you had a class that was drawing down storage and requiring pumping all the time to draw down that storage, but no other classes were doing that, well, there's a different cost associated with providing that service to that customer class than another one. It's probably not an actual occurrence, but theoretically, that would be the basis.
Okay. And I think this pretty clearly shows us that if we were to go with the adjusted cost of service, essentially what would be happening is the municipal and the golf course would be subsidizing the commercial all usage and the commercial multi-unit. Is that?
Yeah, other way around. I mean, the
Yeah.
commercial would be
Oh, I'm sorry.
subsidizing,
Yes,
but
they would be
you're right, yeah.
subsidized by
Correct.
the commercial and the commercial multi-unit.
Yeah.
Okay. And then last question, I believe we currently have a 50% discount for for a residential multi-unit on water tap fees?
Correct. So the first one's full price, and every unit after that is at 50%. That's the multi-tap fee.
Is that taken into account in this as well? Or?
No, it's really not. I mean, it's really been very minimal.
Okay.
It's been handled a few times, mostly by like duplexes, but it's not like we've had a big apartment building come in that's really had a giant reduction in cost from tap fees with that program.
Okay. And if somebody is inside versus outside of city limits, we also are not charging them differently. It's like we don't have a different customer class for Canyon City
We do.
resident.
Yeah, so if you see that subnote 1, outside users are charged at 1.5 times inside.
Okay. So that is a residential or commercial that's outside of
Correct.
city limits?
Yes.
Okay. Okay, thank you. That's
Yep.
really helpful.
We do have a
Oh, good.
council member with their hand up, and so I'll call on Emily Tracy.
Oh, well, thank you. I have a couple of questions, and one of them is on this same slide. I want to be sure I understand how this is calculated. If I understand correctly, you're looking at the current rates, and that's, for example, for Tier 1 residential, that's $2.17 for the 0 to 4,000 gallons. And then cost of service, that next column is calculated based on the cost that that particular kind of class of customer drives. And then the last column, the 2025 adjusted cost of service, you're taking the greater of those two previous numbers, but then adjusting them based on those classes that are not going to see a reduction. Am I saying that kind of right?
Yes, there's some nuances there, but essentially, if we were to go back to that cost of service slide where we showed the reduction in classes, the commercial reduction in the commercial multi-unit, we showed a reduction in their total costs. That's about $700,000. So we redistributed that $700,000 to other customer classes to develop an adjusted rate for the different classes, and that's how we came up with that 227.
Okay, that helps. I wanted to be sure I was following that. And then my other question is in regard to bulk water sales that I think Andrea brought up. Am I understanding correctly then, Travis, that those bulk sales aren't part of this analysis, but we are, like, with a 7% increase, we're adding 7% to that every year, or how does that work?
Yeah, that's exactly right. So they're their own rate schedule. So with any rate schedule getting increased, they would get increased as well. So when we did the 7%, they got a 7% rate increase.
Travis?
So there's no need, I assume, there's no particular need to do an analysis of the cost of that because it's such a different, we're not talking distribution in the same way that we are to other customers and so forth. But we'll just stick with whatever we have now and then do that 7% each year.
Correct. That's the intent of what we're doing here.
Travis, for comparison's sake, do you recall the bulk rate off the top of your head?
I don't, but give me a couple. It is our most expensive water, I will say that. Give me a second, please.
And just while you're looking that up, if I'm understanding correctly, the Water Committee's recommendation is the 2025 cost of service column rather than the adjusted cost of service, but perhaps looking at a phased-in approach, is that?
Yeah, that's correct. Yeah, so bulk water is $10.47 per thousand.
Yeah, and we don't need to discuss it now, but I think there were other questions raised many months ago about bulk water sales and the potential for that water to be trucked somewhere out of the basin for use and not returned to the basin, but that's for another discussion, I assume. But that's all I have, thanks.
Thank you.
Why do we do this? Why do we do this study? We're not covering our costs with our water production, or why did we do the study? It's great, confusing as hell. I have no idea what you talked about. Does anybody in the audience understand what just happened?
I did because I've seen it twice.
You're excluded. I just wonder.
Can I say it in a slightly different
No,
way?
I'm talking right
Okay.
now, okay? I just wondered. If we knew we were going to go to 7%, why don't we just do the 7% and quit going around with all this other stuff? Okay, I can't get an answer. Does the, well, are we covering our costs with our water, or are we going broke?
No,
Are we
not
getting
going
enough
broke.
income to cover all the cost of the production and doing of our water?
You know, we had our water rates set, but I think it's important to know whether the water rates we're charging are going to cover not only our current costs, but our future capital costs, and those capital costs were identified in the Water Master Plan. So I think it was, in my opinion at least, appropriate to make sure that the water we're charging is going to cover all the needs of the future.
And can we not do it this year? With everybody else's expenses going up on everything else, and now we're gonna, we did it with stormwater, we're now doing it with water, taxation. Do we have to do this now?
Mr. Mayor.
Oh, no, the answer is yes, I know, but go ahead.
I think, as it was mentioned earlier, there could be a phased-in approach. It's up to council on how you want to do this.
I haven't seen the phased-in approach. What is that number?
Yeah, we can get into that here in just a moment.
Because what's
but-
going to happen is my constituents, those people that think the mayor has a magic wand, they're going to ask me, and I got to tell them, I have no idea. We're just going to raise the water rate.
So the revenue that we collect today covers our costs.
Okay.
The reason we did the study is because previous councils have asked us to make sure that customer classes are covering their fair share. And that is what this study is looking at, are all the customer classes looking at their fair share.
Yeah,
So
okay.
it is up to council whether or not you want to move forward with any of these
So
plans.
we're looking for fair.
And
Good.
they aren't.
Great.
Like, they
Well,
aren't
come
covering
on.
their fair share.
May I finish?
Yeah, of course.
Okay, thanks. So does the prison pay extra,
No, they're considered a commercial user.
but they're not in the district?
They are outside generally. There's a couple of prisons that are inside.
So they
commercial.
pay the 1.5?
Yes, they do.
They do? And they're a
Yeah.
big user?
Yeah, they're our biggest user.
Do they get-
Combined, all the prisons are.
Okay, so they pay the 1.5.
Yes, if they're outside city
What
limits.
is a meter service charge? What's the charge? What does that mean?
Do you want to go through the fixed costs?
What the actual numbers are, or what's?
No, what is it? Why are we charging that? Does that mean in the future we're holding enough money in case we have to replace someone's meter?
Well, it
Or we're
recovers.
wearing out meters? Well, what's going on here?
So it's representative of some of these customer-related costs. I'd mentioned that we typically capture those, the cost of repairing and replacing meters over time, the cost of billing, monthly billing for customers, and all the associated costs associated with that, the IT, the billing system techs, everything, postage and all those things that go out. And then the other component is recovering some capital in that service charge to help maintain this 30% of total fixed cost to total revenue costs.
And tell me again where you got the 30%.
It's what the city is currently recovering about, around 28, 29%. We wanted to maintain that. And what we've seen in Colorado with other utilities of, like I mentioned there, anywhere between 25 to 35% is kind of the sweet spot for a lot of utilities.
So it's arbitrary.
Somewhat arbitrary, but in the sense that they're looking for revenue stability. And when you have a tiered structure like residential,
Revenue stability, that's
Yeah.
cute. What does that mean?
well, you think about a wet period, and you can prepare for a drought. You see a drought coming. You can't prepare for a wet month in July, and that can really decimate a lot of revenue streams. And so by having a higher fixed charge, it helps offset that a bit to where if you have a wet period or something happens, that you're not going to have a huge dip in your revenues.
So rates stay the same, and then we have this, what you said is fluctuation up and down. Do we take that increment of savings, we put that aside to supplement the years when you have the droughts or whatever?
Yeah, generally when we forecast how much revenue we're going to get, we try to forecast that very conservatively and saying, okay, maybe it will be a dry year. So I think that's something we try to do is, when we're figuring out budgets for next year, how much we're getting in versus how much we want to spend, in current year, we try to at least say, well, it may not be what it was for the last 5 years averaged, it may be less, so we try to forecast that.
And that goes into a savings account?
It goes into the water fund, yeah.
The water fund?
Yeah.
Reserves.
Yeah, reserves.
Are you functioning right now at close to capacity of the plant?
No.
How close are you?
We, at our highest peak day, we're probably about 50%, maybe
So
a little
it
less.
pretty much stays the same, but we're raising rates. Water doesn't cost us anymore.
Well, the cost of doing business goes up.
Oh, okay. I just don't, I wouldn't be in favor. I think that right now with everybody else's costs and with inflation and everything else, and now we're talking about 7% or whatever you want to do it, phase it, talk about it all you want. But I've got to try to explain to my constituents, the people that vote for us, and to justify it. And I'd have a hard time with it.
Understood. Just to be clear, we're not talking about a 7% rate increase across customer classes. That happened in November.
Well, I thought you were, wait, if you talk about fairness, but then you just said that other people are going to pay different. How fair is that?
Well, when we're talking about a restructuring of who pays what, not a 7% increase across the board. I just wanted to make that clear.
So other people, the large consumer is going to pay more.
I mean, different consumers are going to pay different amounts based on, the customer cost of service. I don't know if it's quite right to say the largest consumers are going to pay more.
Well, it sort of looks that way when you look on the chart there. Okay, I'm done. Go ahead.
If I could suggest, Jonathan Sims, does this tee it up for you, or do you need to hear some more discussion?
Thank you for this time to speak. My name is Jonathan Sims, owner's representative for 4 Mile Ranch Plan Development. The new ownership group closed on the property in October 2023 and has no affiliation with any of the previous owners. When the golf course was built, raw water was not available for irrigation, though it was understood that the golf course is of such a benefit to the community that it was worth connecting it to treated water. In fact, in 2010, there was a city ordinance that recorded acknowledgement of the golf course's public benefit with the following quote: "Because the golf course will remain open to public play by local inhabitants, offer unique recreational opportunities, enhance quality of life, generate tourism, and otherwise foster growth and economic development, the department has deemed it to be in the public interest for water rates charged to the golf course to be less than the prevailing rates." This sentiment remains in the current municipal code with the exact same quote, though water rates have increased over the years. On January 9th, the Water Committee met to discuss potential water rate increases. We spoke at this meeting requesting that the current golf course's water rates be maintained. Water is far and away the most costly burden upon the golf course. In fact, last year's water bill was about $200,000. As we understand it, the Water Committee voted to recommend the golf course's water rates be increased by 75%. This takes a $200,000 annual water bill up to $350,000 per year. Prior to the new ownership taking over, the golf course had been operating at a loss, really since it first opened. As popular and admired as a golf course is, it was not profitable until the new ownership took over. They rolled up their sleeves, invested heavily, improved marketing and outreach. The golf course staff is incredible, and now we've gotten the golf course slightly profitable. Increasing the water rates significantly compromises the financial viability of the golf course and frankly puts the golf course at risk of closing. Closing of the golf course puts the entire planned development district at risk. We all know development has been slow. We cannot afford to increase the barriers to development. Even with its sluggish development, 4 Mile Ranch is the principal growth opportunity for the city, and it is referenced throughout the city's comprehensive plans as a critical need, not just for housing, but for providing affordable and attainable housing and for our retiree and older populations. If water rates are increased, there will be several ramifications to the golf course and the planned development. Greens fees will need to increase substantially, which puts the course at a disadvantage relative to other less costly golf courses that are closer to population centers like Pueblo West and Pueblo, Colorado Springs, and Denver. If the golf course shuts down, city residents' property values are certain to go down. If the golf course suffers, the community suffers. The new ownership group is dedicated and motivated to make the golf course successful, as well as the entirety of the planned development and the whole of the city. In fact, the new ownership group has done more for water use reductions in the last 16 months than all previous owners of 4 Mile Ranch. We have a planned development amendment on its way to your desks. Within it, a significant reduction of the planned water infrastructure, whereas we are removing about $2 million worth of new water main piping and significantly reducing the volume and pressure demands on the city's current water systems and equipment. We have also studied every golf course hole to find areas where we can reduce irrigated turf grass, squeezing about 5% of irrigated turf grass out of the course's fairways, enough to make a meaningful impact to reduce water use while not affecting pace of play. We have invested significantly in pump upgrades and improved the nutrients and fertilizer applications, as well as adjusting the type of grass seed used, all to be more water efficient. Since the new ownership took control of the golf course from 2023 to 2024, the golf course's irrigation water usage dropped by about 28%. And we are currently making improvements to the irrigation pond to enhance our water use efficiency. We have also been exploring numerous opportunities to capture raw and renewable water from 4 Mile Creek, nearby irrigation ditches, and well water. In addition, we are gifting the city land for the city's water pump and additional land to add backup power to the pump station. We are also allocating new neighborhoods, many residential parcels, to provide the city with needed affordable and attainable housing. This is in jeopardy if the golf course is in jeopardy. Further support and investment in the golf course supports affordable housing opportunities, as well as supports the viability of a new golf course clubhouse, new driving range, and other tax-generating facilities. In conclusion, we ask that you vote to maintain the golf course's current water rates until we are able to offset the golf course irrigation with raw and renewable water. We are dedicated to making this happen because it is not only good for the golf course, but good for our current residents and a win for the city and our community. Thank you very much.
Thank you for that. Emily, you still have your hand up there, or is that a new request?
It's the still and new. Yeah, I would like to just thank Mr. Sims for his comments. It's really helpful to hear all the details of what's happening with the 4 Mile development. It would be great if we could put slide number 18 back up, because I think it's important to look at, as I understand it anyway, what's being proposed there for a golf course, the 2025 cost of service number versus the 2025 adjusted cost of service number, which does not change from current rates as I read it. So 270, if we went with the adjusted cost of service for all the classes, it would not change the golf course rate 1 penny from 276, it looks like to me. And I think it's also, it's worth talking about that policy approach of the adjusted cost of service, which is that there's probably, even though we all like costs to go down, whether it's our water bill or electric bills, whatever it is, from a setting rate standpoint, it probably makes sense, at least to me, to not reduce anybody's rates and then have them face, even greater increases perhaps in the future. So number one, I'd like to really make sure we consider that adjusted cost approach. And then I think it's important too to just cover again that this is an enterprise fund, and we really do have to, as an enterprise fund, we have to account for all costs, or all revenue and all expenditures within the fund. It doesn't get subsidized by any other part of the city government. And I think it's important to note too that and we're not talking about very much specifically tonight, but the master plan that was developed that the city requested and paid for really shows out for a number of years the kinds of capital expenditures that really need to be made. Now, we can go back over that, I suppose, at some point and see if there's anything we could drop off. But my recollection of the master plan is that those are just necessary capital improvements as machinery ages out or whatever it is. So I just think it's important to recognize that these are actual costs and we need actual revenue to meet those costs. That's all. Thanks.
Thank you. Other questions or comments?
Thanks, Jen. Could we go back to slide 13? Because I think that this shows it in maybe a little bit clearer of a way. So this essentially shows us what the actual cost of service is for each of these classes and what each of them are currently paying. And it shows us just how much some classes are overpaying for other people's water. So all of our commercial and commercial multi-unit, with the exception of the golf course, are significantly overpaying to subsidize the golf course. So that is a ton of other businesses in our community that have to pay more so that the golf course can pay less. So I fully recognize and appreciate that the golf course is a very important part of our community. And it's great to hear that 28% reduction already in the cost or in the amount of water used, and that you have, really great plans to finally build out 4 Mile Ranch, and hopefully we'll have more affordable and attainable and whatever you want to call it, housing that people can actually buy and move into and live. But I think we also, so maybe we don't do it overnight, but I think we need to be looking at what do people actually cost in terms of our enterprise water system, and what are they actually paying? And how do we make sure that we are moving people to that, including significant reductions, 38.5% for commercial multi-unit, almost 8% for other commercial. Like, those are significant cost savings that some of our customer classes would realize if we were actually charging people what they are actually costing.
And is there a summary slide? Is it slide 18 that is the summary slide? Is that correct?
The summary slide is actually probably the comparison of residential bills. That's one of the summary slides. But also the rate, I guess the rate structure.
Sure.
This slide here, and probably the slide of probably the summary of the rates, probably shows the outcome of that costing analysis, that redistribution of costs.
Thank you. Mr. Payne, can you just elaborate a little on the agreement that Mr. Sims talked about the golf course in 2010, and how those rates have changed since then, and how they compare to where we're at today?
Yeah, so we did, I think you're referencing, we did the rate study in 2017. So that rate study also showed that, the municipal and golf course were underpaying for their quote-unquote fair share of cost to the water fund. So it was determined at that time that the golf course should be moved into a commercial, the commercial customer class, and that should be a phased-in approach. I think that was determined that it should be done over a 5-year period. It was either 3 or 5 or something to that effect. It was never done because when that conversation came up, they were given a pass on that rate increase for that year. So that was never instituted from the 2017 rate study.
And so on our where we're at the 276 now, 2025 rates, how is that different from the last year or two?
Last year, so they had the same 7% increase as all the other customer classes. A year before that, I believe, was a 9%. A year before that was a 9%. So anytime that we've raised rates, they've gotten the same rate increases as everybody else.
Yeah, I think it was in 2018, maybe early 2019, when they were moved to that commercial class that Travis mentioned.
Yeah, proposed to.
Every rate adjustment after that has been the same rate increase that has gone across all classes.
Okay, thanks. And just to be clear, I'm a proponent for the golf course, of course. So I do want you guys to know that I do want it to be successful. So we should really consider those things going forward as well.
And so looking at this slide here, the rates proposed to carry forward is which column?
Well, two of the alternatives, or the two far right columns, it's either one of those. The existing 2025 rates are the rates that were adopted back in December and implemented in January 1, and that was a 7% increase across the board, your existing rates and structure. So the second column, cost of service, that's the unadjusted cost of service, and then the other one is the option for the adjusted cost service rates by using that additional revenue from commercial and multi-unit to redistribute to the other customer classes.
Yeah, maybe another way of putting that is we can, do nothing, right, and we're at the 2025 rates. We can do a full cost of service, that would be the second column, or you can do an adjusted cost of service, which would be the third column.
And the Water Committee recommended the third column, is that correct?
That's the second column.
Second column.
Yeah.
But have phased in over 3 years?
3 years is kind of where we sat, and those numbers are not available. I mean, we did not consider a phased-in approach, so if we were to consider that, that would be additional work that Raftellus would do to provide those numbers and what that would look like.
So that it would be a more gentle, gradual for the golf course, and I guess us, the municipality as well, to ensure that we're kind of budgeting for it and it isn't so much of a shock.
So you have down there the golf course, there is no such thing, because you said you moved it to commercial.
No, it was proposed to. It was never moved to commercial.
Never moved to commercial?
It was
Okay.
never moved to commercial, right? Because that would put them as that same rate structure as the commercial, and that did not happen. It was proposed to do with the 2017 rate study.
The council decide not to do that, or what happened?
Council, I mean, I was not in this current position, so I don't have the benefit of direct knowledge of it, but that's my understanding that council decided not to do that year after year.
Mr. Mayor, I think I don't remember the exact details, it predates me a little bit as well, but I believe there was one or two adjustments that were made both to golf and municipal, but that's also at the same time that the city did an incentive agreement for the golf course as well to offset some of those increases that happened during that time.
You know what troubles me a lot, and forget about the water. We talk about development, about having supply. People ask me all the time, how come we don't have this, how come we don't have that? Because we're not growing. And you talk about affordable housing and more housing units, and yet that's not happening either. So I think the 4 Mile is the obvious answer, because that's where it ought to grow. It can't grow anywhere else. Economic development is going to depend on the amenities and things that people want to move here for. And that happens to be the 4 Mile area, in my opinion. So either we're committed to that or we're not. I would be committed to that. I can't explain why Canyon City hasn't grown any better. We have all the amenities that everybody brags about, everybody likes. We really aren't growing. And we don't have the goods and services that we probably ought to have, that I hear from my constituents they'd like to have. And in my business, when they try to come to town, they can't understand why we don't have a pool, why we don't have this or that. And they go to another town. They've got to keep it in mind. Sometimes you got to suck it up on one end for the future. That's economic development and affordable housing. If you really believe that, maybe we ought to look sincerely as one of the things, component of that is a better rate possibly for that area. Disagree?
Could I ask Mr. Sims? Oh, I'm sorry. Well, let me ask Mr. Sims, and then I'll defer back to the chair. Could I ask, I think you mentioned that you would want this much more preferential rate until you were able to move to raw water because you're currently using treated water. What's the timeline on that?
We do not have a specific timeline right now. We're exploring about 4 different options to get water, from 4 Mile Creek, from nearby ditches, from well water, and we're really pushing each of those balls to see which one hits first. So I don't have a timeline. We would love to get it done here as soon as we possibly can. There's some logistical hurdles that we need to get over, water rights, transferring the water across land, storage, all of that stuff. But we believe we can get there. We just need more time to be able to get there. But we are, and I can go through some of the details, but we're actively pursuing 4 different paths right now.
Thanks.
I have another comment. That is the city really interested in reducing the amount of water that the golf course in this case uses? We'd like to do that, wouldn't we? Or would we? I'm baffled at that.
It's probably in the best interest for the golf course to reduce their, it's not best practice to put treated water on a golf course.
And I agree. And we keep raising the rates. It doesn't seem consistent with either economic development or the fact that we would like them to obviously use less water and to do more of a conservative thing with raw water. So I think the city should probably kick in and get on board of that train and help them locate that
And
do that.
Yeah, we've
are
tried to assist in areas that we can, absolutely.
But we haven't to this point.
We've not found a solution, but we've pointed them in several different directions that they're pursuing.
Okay. I just think we ought to be more aggressive in helping them get to the point that they could use the raw water so they can get out of this conundrum that is constantly floating around with expenses and who's paying their fair share and all that other stuff that just wears me out. And I think we should do that. I know the first time I was mayor, they did put money aside to help with a pipeline. And I think you can go back and look that. That's what I heard. And I was the mayor at that time. And I think we should be very aggressive at helping them to find that avenue so that we can get out of this constant problem, because that's got to stay, in my opinion. So.
Yes. Please.
Thank you. Tim Payne, Upper Ark Water and Arkansas River Roundtable, and also I'm a member of the Water Committee. I just want to clarify as far as the Water Committee, when we had this presentation, we're appointed to the Water Committee. We're not elected officials. We weren't comfortable, I think the majority of us weren't comfortable in having residents and commercial subsidize the golf course water. That's for elected officials to make that decision. So that's how we came to that decision as a Water Committee, that we weren't comfortable to make that decision to have residents subsidize the golf course. That's your guys' job. Okay, so that's why that decision kind of, and it was still split. I mean, we weren't in agreement with a lot of that. But anyway, that's why that. And then just another thing on this rate increase, infrastructure's huge. You still had lead pipes transferring water in this city. The North Reynolds Road project that you guys just completed, the water line was just around $1 million that came out of your enterprise fund. So if you want to talk to your constituents on what your rates are costing you, point them to that, Mr. Mayor. $1 million just to replace a water line in one street. That's huge.
Where are the lead pipes at? Residential there.
You had some going
So-
down Main Street. I
What?
think Travis has done a good job of getting those replaced.
That
But
was years
but the
ago. I
point is,
understand that.
you
I
got
understand that.
infrastructure that you need to deal with.
And the most expensive ones are the lead-based pipes that are probably at the hundreds of residential houses in this town. So maybe they should pay a little bit more.
Well, there you go. So you can't keep kicking the can down the road. You got infrastructure with the water treatment plant in the next 10, 15 years is going to be very costly. It's the water committee thought a gradual approach on this 7% to get up to there for your cost on what's going to be coming up is a better approach than do it all at once. Anyway, that was kind of the thinking on the water committee. So thanks for letting me speak.
And so the request of council tonight is to adopt the full customer cost across all customer classes, or retain the greater or existing customer rates, or adopt an adjusted cost of service, which are those three columns right there.
Yes, sir. We need direction. Either keep the status quo, move to a full cost of service, or option 3 would be an adjusted cost of service.
And I would add on to that, do we want to instill the fire line charge and the pumping zone charge? I would say we would like direction on that as well.
What is a private fire line?
So those are the fire lines that are feeding like sprinklers in businesses. Those businesses have a separate fire line apart from their domestic to feed those. Right now, there's no charge for tap fee or maintenance or infrastructure needed to support those fire lines. I mean, those are basically free lines that those businesses have. So should we be recouping some of those costs?
Who owns, does the city own those lines, or?
No, the
Then
customers do.
why would we charge for it?
Because we have to have the infrastructure in place to feed those if they ever,
But they're paying for the infrastructure.
they're paying for the infrastructure, right? Well, they're paying for, not, I think a better way to put that is they're paying for the installation of the individual service lines, but they're not paying into, connecting into the infrastructure that everybody else has.
And then that 38,000 is for us to have increased storage to be able to meet the demand should they have to use them. Is that correct?
Yeah, it's I would say yes. It's carving out what those costs are associated in the storage that we have existing and making sure that cost is recovered.
Hey, John, can I talk?
Sure.
Rick Harmon, Economic Development, for those who don't know. Obviously, I'm going to agree with the mayor on this one. I think we need to promote our community where we have the most amenity to do it, and that's going to be 4 Mile. I've got a lot of thoughts actually, but if we were to look at a cost of service, one of the things we run across all the time is investors coming to us and developers coming to us asking for cash incentives. We don't have those cash incentives. We don't have incentives really at all other than urban renewal at this point, which is tax increment, which sometimes is complicated. If we keep rates for the golf course where they are, while the rest of the rates go up, that could be considered an incentive for the golf course to help with this growth. We've got it's terrible timing for them right now. We have new owners who are willing to work with us for what we need in this community. In fact, before they bought the property, they came to me and asked us as a community, what do we need? Because they want to develop according to our desires. It's pretty tough to find an owner like that, an investor like that. But thankfully, we have a few in our community that are helping us grow that way. But timing right now, even if it is 3 years phased in, is going to be extremely, extremely difficult to make something happen because it's very difficult for us to find development. I was at a conference up in Denver for commercial development and multifamily housing development, and the market is not good right now for development. So, and we typically are going to be 2 years, 3 years behind those more populous markets. So in my thinking, timing is difficult. It's another roadblock that I'll have to try to create development here, which is very difficult. And this could be a very nice incentive to keep them where they are. My background, of course, is public sector, more manufacturing. 12 years as the vice president of a manufacturing operation, dealing with fixed costs all the time, and pricing, and fixed costs and pricing don't necessarily align. Companies have to price their product in a manner that's consistent with their goals for growth. If they want to encourage new business, diversify their industries, they price accordingly to attract business and compete with their competitors. Their fixed cost is spread over all of the products. If somebody gets 5,000 parts, they get a price. If somebody gets 50,000 parts, it's going to be less per unit, simply because that's the way the cost accounting works for manufacturing. We do in the private sector evaluate costs, but if we were to price according to those costs, we'd price ourselves out of business. And that's similar to what Tim was saying, is you have the ability as council members to determine the direction of pricing based on the needs of the community. So there's responsibility accounting, which you could put as direct cost accounting, or there's responsibility accounting in terms of growth. And you have the ability to make that determination. But I just wanted to bring up really the talk about incentives. It's extremely difficult to find those developers, and they all need incentives. So this could be this already is an incentive for them to continue growth, but they have done more in their year and a half than the previous owners have done in 20 years to come up with solutions and savings. This is just not good timing for that kind of effort. So, happy to take questions, but those are my thoughts.
Yes.
I guess it's more of a point of clarification. For 4 Mile, new commercial entities that would go in there, new commercial multi-unit entities that would go in there, new even residential multi-unit fall under commercial multi-unit, right?
Yeah, it's all multi.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So all of those would actually be subject to the commercial and the commercial multi-unit rates, right?
Correct.
Not the golf course rate.
Correct.
So when we're talking about the rest of 4 Mile developing, we aren't talking about them having those incentives under the golf course rate. We're actually talking about charging them more than what the water is actually costing. Is that correct? So like the rest of 4 Mile is commercial multi-unit, or residential, depending on what it is that's being built. Is that right, Travis?
Yeah.
I would say the future commercial and residential would have lower rates that would come into the community, but charging more for water now will take funds away from them to create the infrastructure that needs to be there to allow those developments to come in.
I think what she's saying is if they're going to be considered multi-unit and commercial, those rates are higher. There is no incentive for future development at this point in time.
Correct, but the rates for commercial would come down a little bit, and multi-unit would come down if you go to the cost of service.
Except for the multi-unit, which where they're paying a premium, basically. So, isn't that what you're talking? Is that what you're talking about?
Yeah, I mean, commercial and commercial multi-unit right now are the ones paying a premium.
Oh,
So
right now, yes, correct.
So like if we were to stay with where we currently are, which is those rate classes subsidizing the golf course, those new developments that are coming into 4 Mile aren't getting an incentive payment. They're actually paying
I'm
more.
suggesting that if you go to the cost of service pricing and keep the golf course where it is, that will be an incentive for them in and of itself to continue the improvements they're trying to make.
Could I have a point of clarity? I think the difference that we're talking here is developers' costs versus, the businesses that are coming in. I think what Rick, I'm not trying to speak for you, is saying, the developers would be paying more in golf course rates, and so they would have less money to develop the property. They're not the ones that are ultimately paying the commercial or the multi. So that's less incentive for businesses maybe to move in, but for the developer.
The developers
am I on the right
themselves,
track
yeah,
there?
yeah.
Sure, but there
Yeah.
wouldn't be that incentive for businesses to actually move in, right?
Right, yeah.
So Rick, I'm sorry, I keep interrupting. Rick, what you're saying is you would be in favor of the cost of service column without the increase to the golf course. Is that
Well,
what you're saying?
I prefer simplicity. I don't necessarily like to change things and give the impression that something is changing in the city and making it harder for businesses to work in the city.
Right, no, I'm just,
But if there's going to be cost of service, I wouldn't say that's my preference, but if there's going to be cost of service pricing, keep an incentive for the golf course to continue their work and keeping their rates where they are.
I would like to see a list or a timeline from the company about what they're doing for raw water, where it is, what the options are. I spent a lot of time with ditches, and so there's so many things that are problematic in that area, and I'd just like to know where they are, because I think that would make this whole decision a lot easier to consider if we knew, you know, what the hope is or chances, because we don't know. It's like it's kind of ephemeral what they're, and I get it, because water's complicated in the West, but I'd just like to see like a list of, you know, what, this is my best option, this is my second, third, fourth, whatever, but I would like to see that before we have to make a decision. Thank you.
They can do that.
Mayor Pro Tem Hamrick, I believe Ms. Tracy has her hand up as well.
Oh, there we go. Yep, I see it. Emily?
See, I did want to answer the question from a few minutes ago, at least from my point of view. I think the proposals around fire lines and pumping costs, I think those make sense to me. So I just wanted to say that while I had the chance. I am going to have to, depending on how long the discussion goes, I'll have to go till, or I'll have to leave the meeting by 7:45. I would like to hear more discussion about the adjusted cost of service approach, whether there's anything more that either Travis can add or that perhaps Mr. Cristiano can add. I don't know if I'm hearing any other support on council for that, but I do think that that's worthwhile to consider that closely. Thanks, that's all.
Thank you for that.
Can I add something? I really want to irritate everybody, so take it with a sense of humor. So I remember being part of the group, the company that sold that. That was the Stills Ranch. And then it went into problems. I think a lot of it had to do with the type of zoning the city had at that time. That's been changed. The company that ended up in receivership of that was of another country. Didn't care. I tried working with them. They didn't care. We have a golden opportunity right now with two big projects, the Abbey and 4 Mile, to look good to the rest of the world and get developers to do things that our citizens want. I gotta tell you, I hear this all the time. Well, the developer will pay for it. They're not going to. I was a developer. I went to another state and was treated differently. Canyon City needs to get rid of that reputation, and we need to be very much in favor of development. And at some point in time, we can change that. But this isn't the time. And economic development better be important. And we talk about housing and everything else. That's all part and parcel of it. You better be on board with it, or we're going to be left in the dust as this little town that ain't going anywhere. That hurts. I've spent 50 years of my life here.
I'll call on you shortly, but Mr. Mayor, so of the three choices, considering everything that you've said, which would be your choice?
I don't remember the three choices I've.
That right there.
What?
Right there, 2025 rates, 2025 cost of service, or 2025 adjusted cost of service?
What's the difference between the cost of service and adjusted cost of service? Adjusted for fairness, or what is that all about? Why is that?
The adjusted cost of service was set up such that no one's rate would be lower than the existing, than the 2025 rates that you have now. It was just an option. When we looked at costing all of the classes, we noticed that in our analysis, the commercial and commercial multi-unit were going down substantially, and others were going up quite a bit. So we wanted to kind of balance that out and reduce the impact to other customer classes. So It's a similar process, we just took an extra step on the back end of our analysis to do that.
Well, obviously, I'd go with the 25 adjusted cost of service. That would be my opinion, and it doesn't have to happen immediately, but maybe that's where we ought to go. I'm not crazy about the 2025 cost of service. That seems like bada bob, bada bing, we just raise the price, and I don't go along with that. So I would go with behind door 3, column 3.
And the 2025 rates, that's what's in place right now. So I guess that's an option as well.
Then that's the option we ought to go with.
Kathy?
I'm confused, which is not unusual, but Mr. Mayor, I'm with you as far as trying to develop 4 Mile and the Abbey, but that's going to take infrastructure. And unfortunately, as has been mentioned in the master plan and so forth, there's an awful lot of costs involved in that infrastructure. How do we achieve that infrastructure if we cannot even cover the costs that we have right now? And that means having some type of rate increase. I'm not saying 1, 2, or 3, or door 1, 2, or 3, but you can't get what we have right now and also achieve the goals that we want for the future without some type of all of us, quote unquote, pitching in.
Okay, but as a former small-time developer, who pays for the water and sewer lines that go in there?
The developer does.
Okay, so the city's not on the hook for it. We're giving, you will accept it and it goes to the city.
But on the other hand, you said that we as a city should get out of that and welcome them and pay for that so that we will have developers. Did I totally misunderstand that?
Yeah, you did. I would
Fine,
never
thank
say
you.
that. I would never say that. No, the developer has, but it's fungible. All these funds are fungible. If they're taking up their money, in this case for the golf course, they won't have it available for the infrastructure that they're going to have to do. And that's millions of dollars. That's upfront cost, upfront capital. The same way with the Abbey.
Okay.
You've got to be
One
careful
thing
about that.
I liked about what Andrea was saying is that if we saw the different options and we as a city are supposed to help them come to another solution of not using treated water, that's where the city could, if we saw the 3 or 4 options that are there, perhaps we could, as a city, could say, okay, let's put in so much money to help them get that so that we can start getting the regular rates that we should be getting for everybody else.
And I agree, and we did that at one time, and somehow it didn't work out or something. The irrigation rights weren't there, the right-of-ways or some such thing. But when that was annexed into the city, it was deliberately hooked up so that a certain ditch would be able to have a right-of-way to that area. So, but you're right. I concede.
So you're looking for a sense of council, correct?
Yes, sir.
Let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 opinions, counting Emily, I think, is about where we are.
Can I get one more thing,
Sure,
one more
please.
clarification? Can you go to the next slide? I think it's 19. You want us to speak on this as well, right?
Yes, please.
So the 2025 rates and the adjusted cost of service, there's only one that goes up 20 cents. Everything else is the same. Is that, oh, no, and then a couple go down. Or do you want us to say if that's okay to lower these fees?
So nothing should go down in the adjusted.
Well, okay, I said that wrong. The cost
Yeah.
of service is not covering what, the 2025 cost of service, we're not covering those costs on the other column. Is that correct?
On the adjusted cost of service?
On the adjusted cost of service.
I believe that on the adjusted cost of service, it kind of goes with the rest of the volumetric rates in that we didn't have any that needed to, well, let me get this straight. A lot of conversation tonight, so.
Yeah. Maybe I'm misunderstanding, but if it costs $3.17, but we're only charging $1.79.
We were able to buy down the rate based on the over collection of commercial multi-unit.
Thank you. I
Okay.
appreciate you.
All right, that makes more sense. Okay.
Yeah.
So if you want my consensus, I'm okay with the adjusted cost of service across the board.
And I see that a thumbs up there. And what would your choice be?
I would go with a phased-in approach to the 2025 cost of service. I mean, just doing back-of-the-envelope math, I think that our commercial and commercial multi-unit have paid over $5 million since 2010 to enable the lower costs for the golf course and the municipal, and I don't think that that is business-friendly at all. So I don't want to see a shock to anyone. I don't want anyone to have to go out of business, so I think a phased-in approach where maybe the first phase is this November, December, that starts in January of 2026. And I think the Water Committee proposed 3 years, which gives folks a nice, slow, gradual transition. If the golf course has already reduced water usage by 28%, then they're already going to pay less in water this year than they did last year. So I think that there's a way to make this fair for businesses across our city, and I don't want to see anybody subsidizing anybody else more than we need to. If there's something that we want to do as a city to incentivize, then I think that we should be looking at that outside of the enterprise authority, because we are already charging our water department a heck of a lot through our cost allocation plan. And I think if we're trying to do something from a city development perspective, then we should be looking at city money to do it. Thanks.
How would you say, I guess I kind of look at the adjusted cost of service as part of the phase-in. How would you differentiate that?
Sure. I don't think, if you go back to slide 18, so the 2025 adjusted cost of service still has commercial multi-unit paying $5.81 per 1,000 gallons of water, whereas their actual cost is only $3.25.
Gotcha.
So we are charging people more than we actually should be, than it's actually costing us. So I would think that a phased-in approach, and I obviously would want Raftellus and our water department to do the actual numbers, but I would think a phased-in approach would be, okay, if we are at this kind of delta, next year we should be 33% closer to what the actual costs are, or something like that. But defer entirely to you, Mr. Cristiano.
No, that makes sense. So essentially, we would take, very simplistic, we would take the 2025 rates you have and transition them, let's say, commercial all usage, $3.52 is where you're at today. And over a course of 3 years, we would transition that down to $3.20. Notwithstanding any sort of other rate adjustments or anything like that, we'll just take that off the table. In a similar fashion, we would transition the golf course from $2.76 to $4.82 over a 3-year period. The numbers won't be exactly like that, but we're transitioning to costs that should generate $4.82. So so the adjusted cost of service is out of the equation at that point. We're just basically, we're transitioning, instead of ripping the Band-Aid off, we're doing it over a couple of years. And you'd still recover your overall cost over those periods too.
And again, if we as a city, from an economic development standpoint, think that we should be giving the golf course more of an incentive, I'm not opposed to us looking at the city general fund economic development account and saying, okay, we want to incentivize them. This is how much we're going to incentivize them by, from an economic development standpoint. I just don't think it should come off of the hides of other businesses in our town.
So which one did you pick?
I
Two?
picked 2025 cost of service phased-in approach.
The middle one, number 2.
The middle one, door number 2.
Door number 2, okay. And I
With
picked
adjustments.
With adjustments. What would those adjustments be then?
No, just a phased-in approach. So phasing it in over 3 years instead of it being a shock approach where at the next city council meeting, everybody's rates suddenly dramatically change. We change it over roughly 33%, 2026, 2027, 2029. I would obviously want our city attorney to weigh in to make sure that we were able to have some sort of resolution to make sure that we actually did it this time, as opposed to the water rate study that happened last time that city council did not actually act upon. Thanks.
I'd like to see that, so, but I'm still with door 3.
Right. If we phase it in, what if the costs for providing water to this community go up to the point where by the 3rd year, it's going to have to be more than what we're looking at today.
We would apply the revenue adjustments on top of what we're transitioning. So it's, here, we're just trying to transition from, I'm sorry?
Have to be more than that?
Yeah, so whatever, the previous financial plan showed 7% revenue adjustments for a number of years.
Right.
So if we transition over 3 years, what we would do first is transition from the 352 to 320, find what those rates are.
So
then-
these costs, the 2025 cost, is still going to be the same in 2027? Is that what you're saying?
If there are no rate increases, but we will transition and we will incorporate the revenue adjustments from the financial plan.
So our
We can do-
costs are going to stay the same for 3 years?
No.
Okay, thank you, that's all I wanted to know.
Okay.
But to be clear, the numbers in all three columns would go up because the bottom line would have to go up based on what the projected cost would be. So regardless of which door is picked, the numbers would be different for each year.
All right, so if we transitioned over 3 years, we'd have to incorporate those 7 percentages that were projected in the financial plan.
Yes,
We have a resident that would like to speak, is that possible?
sure. Come on up. Tell us your name and where you live, please. And do we need a slip filled out also? So after speaking, if you would fill the slip out.
Okay, yes, I'm sorry, I did not fill a slip out, but thank you so much for letting me speak. I'm a longtime Canyon City resident. I've been in Canyon City 25 years now. Canyon City is a great town. I think there's a point that we're not kind of recognizing, and that is that the intangible effects that the golf course brings people to this town, and they spend money in a lot of different areas. They spend money on restaurants, they spend money on hotels, a lot of different things. And the golf course is a huge amenity. Most other towns that you go to have a golf course, and it draws people, does bring people here. I can say that we get a lot of traffic from Denver, a lot of traffic from Colorado Springs because of our weather. It brings people down here. It would be a huge loss, huge, to this community if we lose the golf course. As Jonathan was saying, it's not like it's raking in tons of money. I think they're starting to turn a little bit of a profit now, which is great. But they are so committed to putting that money into the golf course, increasing the amenities there, to continue the golf course to be the draw that it is to Canyon City. So that's what I see as a resident of this city. I want this city to grow too. I want those amenities there so that people will want to come to this area, want to spend their money, go to Chili's and eat, go to stay those new hotels that we have, continue to generate revenue for the Canyon City in that manner as well. And I don't know if I said my name. My name is Valerie McAndrews. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Well, go ahead. I just wanted to thank her for saying that, and I am not in any way, shape, or form willing to risk our community partners at 4 Mile Ranch over some water rates. It's super important, and they're doing all they can to help with development and help with amenities, and it is not risk putting them at risk over trying to phase in. I just hope that they'll get their raw water situation figured out over the next few years, and then we can lower everyone's rates and stay status quo. But there's no way we should be risking anything at 4 Mile Ranch that would cause them any financial harm.
And I would point out that the increase from 276 to 482, even over 3 years, is a 75% increase. There are issues of fundamental fairness that we're wrestling with up here tonight. I mean, because of the current water rate structure, we do have residents or users that are subsidizing other users. And really, if that should be happening, that is something that we probably should deal with outside of the water rate structure. In other words, essentially the suggestion you were making that needs to be in a different conversation, that we should, as has a look at fundamental fairness. It's uncomfortable for me to charge differing rates for water use. Ideally, we could get to a unified rate, but there's a lot of other balls that are up in the air here in this particular discussion. Do you, Mr. Administrator, do you feel you have enough direction, or do you need? Sure.
I think we've talked a lot about the golf course, and what we haven't talked about is the municipal line item. And right now, we currently do a full cost allocation plan, which means that we ensure that the water department pays a portion of our city administrator, a portion of our finance director, a portion of all of these other city costs we charge to the water department, which causes everybody's rates to go up. And yet we are not actually, as a city, paying what our water is actually costing. So I also just wanted to point that out, like going with the 2025 adjusted cost of service, we are continuing to have the other rate classes subsidize the municipal water costs as well. So I just feel like there's also a fundamental unfairness that we are doing a full cost allocation plan where we are charging the water department money for all of these shared city expenses, from the Springbrook financial platform to our streets department to everything else, and yet we don't actually pay the water department the cost of city water. So anyway, but I realize that I am perhaps alone in those sentiments as well, so.
Could I just add something else? I wish we'd have, so in your water bill, you have stormwater, which oftentimes is more than the water, which I think is absurd. And then water. I think if we had that this robust of a discussion on stormwater, it would do us a whole lot of good, and I think we need to put that back on there. I am sick and tired of seeing a bill that is costing our residents on stormwater, the rain tax, more than water. That irritates me. I'll just be honest with you. And now that I've irritated everybody, I'm going to quit.
And just for council, we do have stormwater coming up on a future council agenda. So just for your benefit, Mr. Mayor.
So get back to my question. Do you feel you have enough guidance? Or
I'm going to defer to Travis to see if he feels that he has enough guidance.
I do have another suggestion that may make it a little bit easier. Rather than drafting one ordinance, you might, considering everything that's been said tonight, draft two, and then have a pick and choose type thing. Did you have some intelligence there, Travis?
Sure, I can do that. So what I'm hearing is you would like to see an ordinance drafted at the 2025 cost of service and one drafted for the 2025 adjusted cost of service?
With a transition on the 2025 cost of service.
Okay, that'll take some time, but we will get there.
And perhaps also with that option, have a conversation with the Economic Development Department to see what incentivizing the 4 Mile development might look like, so that you are able to ensure that there isn't potential harm to that economic development prospect. Please feel free to add, Councilmember Maloney.
Sticker shock.
I'm just throwing this out there. On the flip side, could we, instead of messing with 4 Mile Ranch, can we figure out how to incentivize commercial multi-units across the entire city in lieu of, since they're paying a premium, can we come up with incentives for them and not mess with the status quo with what's going on with everything else? Is that an option?
I guess my only concern is it does sound like 4 Mile is working really, really diligently to transition to raw water. So I think a more evergreen, lasting solution would be figuring out a way to gradually help support them until they're able to accomplish that goal. But if the rest of council feels strongly about incentivizing in the other direction, it will likely be a whole new council by the time that we get to needing to worry about evergreenness. Thanks.
Any other comments from council? Are we good, Mr. Administrator?
I think so.
Okay. All right. Well, with that, and having no other business in front of us, I think we're adjourned.